essential key elements of training for hypertrophy that are present in every bit of your training protocol at all times. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking of those things like progressive overload. Mm-hmm. Is it, a certain split? Is it the style of training in which you do? Like just play on some of those key themes so that for the people listening, including myself, who I haven't trained a lot in the last couple of years, I gym twice a week usually, I run more, but I feel like I'm coming
hybrid.
As they say, I feel like I'm coming into a little transitional period where I'm like happy to run 2-3 days and just do like moderate Ks, but want to get in the gym a little bit more and maximize this window of my life in which I can build some muscle and hopefully be a hench dad.
I love that. Okay, so if we look at training and I look at the principles that I stand by, progressive overload is one of them. So when we talk about progressive overload, it is adding a little bit more effort session to session over weeks, months, years. The thing that we know about progressive overload is it doesn't have to be in just load. It can be through maintaining the load from the week before and increasing rep ranges, total reps, or it can be load, or for some people who, if you notice that you increase the load and the range shortens, you can increase the range. The thing that we know about what moves the needle in terms of hypertrophy is we can create hypertrophy across all rep ranges, right? Anywhere between 5 up to 30. It actually has nothing to do with the rep range and everything to do with the tension that we create on the muscle. So as long as you are creating enough tension on the muscle, which happens when we work in proximity to true muscular failure, you are going to get that hypertrophy response. So that's why when we look at progressive overload, it can be load if load is there. So some weeks that you go in, or some days you go in and you're like doing the previous week's weight and you're like, I think I've got more load available to me today. You might choose load as the progressor and aim to manage or match the same reps as the week before, which means that by nature you are increasing something called total volume load, which is your reps times sets times weight lifted. So something that's really important when it comes to tracking your progression in the gym is knowing what the previous week's volume was so that the next week, whether you choose load or reps, you are increasing that total volume load than the week before and working to that proximity to failure. They're the two most important things for hypertrophy. So when people get stuck around what's the perfect rep range for hypertrophy, there isn't one. Because even if you did 8 reps, which we consider strength hypertrophy, and you're doing that all right, if you're not reaching that mechanical tension through that effort applied on the muscle, you're still falling short. And I also wrote, so I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but we talk about progressive overload. You can still add progressive overload. But again, if you're not reaching or working towards that proximity to failure, so we know that 3 to 2 to 1 are like reps in reserve of failure, is enough to create that hypertrophy response. Even if you're adding more load or the reps before, but you're still falling short of that discomfort, you're not going to hypertrophy the muscle. So essentially what we want to see is those last kind of 5 reps where the velocity or the speed of the rep slows down involuntarily. That's where you're actually starting to make the changes. But people get confused with this feels uncomfortable, but the rep speed is the same versus I am absolutely giving this everything to get each of these last couple of reps out. That's where we want to learn to expose our muscle to over time. And that's why we use things like progressive overload to increase the effort week to week.
What should the perceived exertion be per set, per session to achieve that kind of proximity to failure?
For hypertrophy? And I guess what's hard is because such a nuanced answer around what people perceive as effort. Like
how many reps would you say to leave in the tank? Or do you leave any in the tank?
I mean, I've been told recently I'm not allowed to fail. So I'm just I'm in a really tricky spot of am I training hard enough? Can I do one more rep? Is this too much? But for general population or anyone listening here, you want to try and get no less than 3 reps left in the tank. Sorry, no more than 3 reps. No more than 3 reps.
I feel like that's probably an instinctive range too, would you say? That most people get there and they're like, oh, I know I've got one more, but I don't know if I've got two more.
Yeah. And I think when you get to that point where you're like, you get to the point where you're like, can I do one more? Do one more. Buckle up and do one more. Because when someone says to you 5 more and you're like, are you fucking kidding me? But you probably have 5 more, but 5 feels so overwhelming. Just give me one more. One more. You've got one. And then you end up getting 3 or 4 more out. And if you didn't ask yourself, can I have one more? You're way out of that 5 rep, like that 3 rep shy of failure. Most people have way more than what they're actually giving, but they need someone to stand by them and say, just do one more. Because a lot of training, like, it's a confidence thing. And I think training maturity, which is something we learn over time, is the ability to build confidence in ourselves that we can give it one more rep.
Yeah.
And then the other is, if you're a beginner listening to this, you do not go to failure. You actually don't need to. You're so lucky. You just need to have consistency and repetition under your belt. But anyone outside of being a beginner, at some point it'd be good for you to learn what true failure is, so you know how to work just shy of that, but only do it on exercises that are safe enough to do so.
Last 2 relatively quick fire ones for you, because then we've got to get you out of here. Is progressive overload even worth your time and energy if you're not eating in a calorie surplus to build muscle?
If the goal is to build muscle, you need at least maintenance calories, ideally a conservative surplus.
What's conservative percentage-wise?
Conservative is like anywhere between 5 to 10% of an increase in your calories above maintenance. And, maintenance, like I said, you can turn some lean tissue over, but you're not going to maximize muscle tissue. In saying that, a lot of people are very scared to go into a build, so that's also where I'd start. But at some point, you're going to have to increase food, because if you're not seeing, it's not just about your weight, it's about the metrics. So if you've been working on your quads or your glutes and they're not going up, and you know that training intensity is there and you've got a decent amount of volume, nutrition is the thing that I would increase, right? And you just need to increase your intake by like 5% each time every couple of weeks, and just making sure you're staying on top of, is everything moving in the right direction? The other thing is fat is more sensitive to calories than what muscle is, which is why you don't just push calories, because you can't fast feed muscle. Muscle is such a slow process that you need that consistency, but you need time being exposed to a surplus without it being so far above maintenance that you just start to accumulate body fat.
Can confirm that is completely true.
So when people say, oh, eat big to get big, well, it's got to be strategic. And so it's not just about weight, it's quality weight. And I think if more people understood what was required of them in a build, they would learn how to respect it, and that would then transcend into how well they respected the process. Because when people throw out the thing of trust the process, you can't trust the process, one, when you're not following it, but also when you don't understand. Because it's just like a stranger coming up to you and being like, come with me. You'd be like, I don't even know you. Why would I come with you? If you don't understand what is required of building muscle, and even how nutrition kind of is influenced by the body, then just following something doesn't really stick. And eventually when motivation dies, which it will, because it always does, you'll just go back to your old habits, because that's what feels safe and that's what's comfortable, and that will always win.
The last one for you. To be hypertrophic, and if you're eating in a calorie surplus, how much rest do you need to make sure that you're recovering optimally to train? And this is just for the everyday lifter.
That depends on where you're at with your total training. So, and also like how old you are. So in our 20s, we can handle more frequency, more volume, more intensity, because we are so much more sensitive to muscle protein synthesis. As we get into our 30s, 40s, and 50s and beyond, we need to keep the effort that we learnt how to do in our 20s, but we need to drop the volume. And so in our 20s, we might train 5 days a week, but in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, 4 days, and for some people 3, especially if it's full body, you can get a really great response to hypertrophy. So when we look at all the studies, they're not done on 5 days of training. They're actually done on 3 to 4 days of training.
That's nice
So
to hear.
that means, because I always think, okay, let's look at the ratio. Work to rest. We got 4 days of work, 3 days of rest. That is far better than 5 days of work, 2 days of rest. Or even better, 3 days of work, 4 days of rest. Personally, most people feel better about themselves going to the gym 4 days a week. I personally do. There's no way. I used to train 5 days a week. There's no way I could do that now, not with the intensity that I push. I would just break down. I would get reverse results. So in our 20s, we have more access to volume, frequency, and intensity. In our 30s, 40s, and 50s, we want to take the effort that we learned in our 20s and we want to apply it to those 3 to 4 sessions that we do there. And then we want to make sure that we really focus on recovery. As we get older, we want the stimulus, but we want the recovery. And that's what I think about when it's like training is a stimulus, nutrition is the anabolic environment, sleep wraps it all together. You might have the perfect plan of nutrition and training, but if your sleep is off, you will not get the result that you want. Sleep is the most underrated thing that we can do for our bodies, yet is the thing we compromise the most. There is nothing more anabolic than sleep.
I bloody love that.